Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we are talking about Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is the edition I read, which is the 1818 version, a little bit different from the 1831, which is the revised version. So just to give you guys a little summary of the plot, if you want to go in blindly to read this, then please feel free to pause this video and come back later. But basically, the plot of this novel is the story of a young man by the name of Victor Frankenstein, who lives in Switzerland with his family, and he is sent to another city to study science. And somehow he becomes obsessed with the idea of creating a creature from scratch, basically infusing life into a new creature. So the way he proceeds to do this is by visiting the local morgue, and somehow I guess they didn't have too many regulations in those days, and somehow he is able to get different bones and different pieces of skin and then stitch together what we would call a creature. So the being that he creates is about 8 feet tall and has pretty ugly features because he's all stitched up from different pieces of different beings. He somehow is able to figure out a way to infuse life into the creature, and then he is almost scared at his own creation. So what happens is the creature runs away. He doesn't know what happened to the creature. And later on, we find out that the creature is living in a shed next to a family, and little by little is learning speech and language. And the creature gets to this point where the creature is interested in basically integrating society and being able to empathize with fellow humans. But the problem is the physical appearance of the creature is so scary that he will not be able to have normal interactions with fellow humans. The humans that the creature meets are so scared of him, they either run away from him or they beat him up. And so the book describes how there's this switch that happens where at first the creature really wants to have friends and to be a productive member of society and to cooperate with other people. But because of all the rejection and the abuse that he faces, he very quickly ends up turning into basically a monster. So in other words, in the beginning, it's just the physical appearance that would fit under the description of monster, so to speak. But by about halfway through the book, his personality becomes the personality of a monster. So in other words, he's not afraid to kill people. He has no remorse. He has no feelings. And so this becomes a very dark tale. A few things I want to say about this book, right? So the first thing is there's a very personal aspect to this because Mary Shelley lost her mother when she was still an infant. She wasn't even a month old when her mother passed away. And so you can imagine that she grew up with this sort of magical thinking, this wish, this deep wish to be able to bring the dead back to life. And so this book almost feels like her therapy. She wrote this when she was only 18 years old. So it feels like she wanted to imagine what would happen if you could bring a dead person back to life, if you could infuse life into something that was once dead. And so I find that very interesting how she somehow, instead of just being sad that her mother passed away, she somehow used all that that sadness and that anger that she must have had, to somehow rechannel it into her own imagination. I think reading this book really brings up a lot of questions. In my mind, what I noticed, which was quite disturbing, was just how quickly the switch happened, right? Because if you are reading along to the thoughts and the feelings inside of the creature's mind, he's having a lot of very compassionate feelings towards this family that he lives next door to. When they're sad, he feels sad with them. And when they need something, he tries to make himself useful. So sometimes he goes out at night to chop some wood, and then he leaves it there for them so that they have sort of a secret benefactor. All these little things that make you realize that he is capable of empathy. And then within, I would say, a page or two, when he tries to show up and talk to them and that they reject him and the son beats him up and they are basically horrified by his appearance, and it doesn't take long for him to basically shed his empathy, become a monster, and basically become a murderous creature. So to me, that is an important lesson, because I feel like we as humans, as normal human beings reading this book, I've seen a lot of reviews of the book and things like that. The general impression of this book is, ooh, this is a nice gothic tale. This is kind of spooky. It's good to read in the fall. It's a horror novel, right? But I feel like perhaps we are too quick to shove this in the horror category and feel complacent in our own lives that this is a little bit removed from our own experience. And I feel like maybe we need to re-examine that. And maybe we need to think about, wait a minute, this switch that she describes, that the person who was cast away, ostracized, becomes a monster and a murderer. Yes, this is a horrific story, but isn't that something that we witness frequently in our world of normal humans? Because I feel like a lot of times when there's a murder that happens, or a mass shooting, right? And then you start to read about the backstory. And what you usually will find is that that person that is described as a monster, a murderer, started out as the one that was being bullied or that was being ostracized. So perhaps what she's describing here is not some weird, highly imaginative, made up story about a monster. Perhaps she's giving us a symbolic tale that shows us something fundamentally human, which is how trauma can turn a perfectly empathic human being into somebody who's devoid of empathy, devoid of remorse, and is just, in essence, a monster. So I think that this book definitely gave me a lot of food for thought, because it was like being forced to look at a phenomenon that I feel is still a mystery. I think that in this day and age, we are still baffled by such phenomena, right? So if somebody becomes a murderer, we are not quite able to describe how that happened. We're not able to predict that it's going to happen. But I feel like the phenomenon is there. It's everywhere around us. It happens frequently. And perhaps in the future we will solve the mystery and we will figure out exactly how this switch happens where a human can literally shed their own empathy. So that was one thing that came to mind when I read this book. And of course, another thing that came to mind is the responsibility of any scientist who makes a discovery. This is very evident in one part of the book where the creature confronts Victor Frankenstein and asks him to create a female version of himself so that he may have some companionship. And Victor really goes back and forth in terms of deciding if he wants to do this or if he doesn't want to do this. And in the end, his main dilemma is the fear that this monster will have children who will themselves become monsters as well, and whether or not this will impact the trajectory of the human experience for generations to come. And I think that's definitely something that we need to think about, is anything that has to do with science and new discoveries. We have to realize there's a responsibility there. And it's not just something that has an impact right now. It's also something that will have an impact on future generations. And so overall, I felt like this novel really raised some important philosophical questions. And I feel like it definitely touched on some important topics that I'm fascinated with. I'm fascinated with the idea of trauma, how it affects the brain. I've read a couple of books about trauma that I would like to discuss on this channel. So let me know if you guys are interested in me discussing those nonfiction books as well, okay? But I highly recommend this one, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And I think I'm going to be looking for the other version as well. So I hope you guys are enjoying the fall season. This is definitely an excellent book for fall. Till next time, happy reading!